Hi, Nat Doig here. Just a heads up that today's episode is all about Mary and Mother Sutton, two women who were accused of witchcraft in the early 17th century. And so this does involve violence against women. This episode also includes some discussion about child loss, and also from the very start there are some descriptions of animal sickness and mutilation. Hello and welcome to Weird in the Wade, a podcast about all that's weird, wonderful and a little off-kilter in the town of Biggleswade in Bedfordshire. Each episode, I'll tell you a tale of something strange and unique that has happened in this most English of market towns or its surrounding area. There's an older meaning to the word weird, which means to twist and turn. In Norse myth and in Anglo-Saxon times, this came to mean fate or destiny, all that was and is, and all that is yet to be. Whether it's tales of ghosts or flying saucer hoaxes, the big cat of Biggleswade, or the pot and poisoner, curious social history, or the Great Swan Mystery of 1935, we'll follow all the twists and turns and uncover fascinating stories that will speak to you today, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Weird in the Wade. It was before dawn, a sharp nip in the air. Simon, the youngest and newest stable boy, was making his way to the stable block at Master Inger's mill and farm. Mist was slinking across the fields as Simon shivered, looking forward to the warm fug of the stable. Now at the farmyard, the cock was crowing, though it startled on seeing Simon and was struck silent. And a stray black pig was snuffling amongst the dirt, but it too stopped its grunting when it saw the stable boy. Although Simon was new to the job and only just tall enough and strong enough to open the latch on the stable door, he knew instinctively that something was wrong, though at the time he couldn't put his finger on it. Later he'd recall it was the stillness. He could not hear the usual impatient snorts of the horses, their hooves restlessly stamping. When he opened the stable door, there was just silence. Silence and an unfamiliar stench. Not the usual smell of horsehair, straw and manure that he had grown used to. No, the stable stank of iron, of the butcher's shop, of the Martinmas Day slaughter, of the family pig, of offal and something else, wholly rotten. He looked along the block of stalls. There were no whinnying heads to greet him ready for their feed. Along the channel in the floor, which he should soon be sluicing, there was a dark ooze of liquid that looked a lot like blood. Warily, Simon stepped towards the first stall in the stable and peered over the door. Then he screamed. Master Inger took his youngest stable boy into the kitchens, instructing his cook to make up a warm herbal drink to steady the young boy's nerves.
Simon, isn't it?
Inger asked. Yes, sir.
Stay here with cook. You've had a fright and a shock, but you'll be all right, lad. Just take the drink the cook gives you.
The little boy began to weep silently as John Inger turned away. One of Inger's oldest and most trusted servants arrived at the kitchen door, a man named Cornelius Harbird, a bent-over, white-haired man with a wizened face and roomy, pale blue, almost grey eyes. His nose was like a beetroot in his leather-spotted face. Ancient was the word that sprung to mind when you beheld Cornelius Harbird, but he was surprisingly strong for his age, and his mind was sharp, if a little fanciful at times, Inga thought. He was pleased to see him now, though.
You've heard?
Inga asked.
Unseen, master. It's worse than last time, surely. It is, I'm afraid, yes, far worse. You'll lead your team on the clean-up, the disposal of the bodies. I will, sir. Of course I will. Though if you will allow me, sir, I have to say, it's not natural, master. None of it. A horse may in a fit of distemper kick out at its stable fellow and injure it horribly, sir. But a horse cannot strangle itself, cannot cut its own throat. That's just wrong, impossible. A single man cannot do so much evil to a whole stable of horses, sir. Not go unheard or unseen. This is the work of something sinister, master. Just like the pigs tearing at themselves, gouging at their innards and drowning themselves in the mill pond last autumn. That was not natural, Master Inga. Yet we have seen it happen twice now. Nor the cattle and the oxen that were struck down last spring. I have worked in many places and had many masters before I came to be within your household, Master Inga, and I have never witnessed such a horrible amount of unnatural and abhorrent deaths. And my father always said, when there is no natural explanation for such awful death and disease, then the devil is behind it, sir. The devil and his servants. And I'm sorry to say, master, but this village harbours two agents of the devil. I know it, and they...
Enough, Harbird!
Inga interjected wearily. An already difficult day could become unbearable if Harbird continued with his accusations of devilry and witchcraft. Welcome to Weird in the Wade. I'm Nat Doig, and today's episode is all about a witch trial held in the pretty village of Milton Ernest in 1612. Milton Ernest is some 5 miles north of Bedford. The village has a rich and fascinating history, which is covered wonderfully in David Newman's book, The Importance of Milton Ernest. There's even a village history trail signposted around Milton Ernest that you can follow, taking in the many 16th and 17th century properties which still exist. And the wealth of history also includes the county's first printing press and a remarkable Second World War history. I will be returning to Milton Ernest in the future to cover the mystery of Glenn Miller's disappearance, because his fateful last flight took off from Milton Ernest, never to be seen again. But today, it's the early 17th century Milton Ernest that we are interested in. The village nestles alongside the river Great Ouse and is named for the mill which lay on the outskirts of the village. And it's this mill where much of the action in today's episode took place. Our historical source is not a criminal trial transcript. Any that existed were destroyed in a fire in Bedford many, many years ago. Instead, we have a pamphlet, and that tells us the story of Mother and Mary Sutton, a mum and daughter accused and tried for being witches. It's a propaganda pamphlet. Think of it as the viral social media post of its day. These pamphlets shared the sordid and often inaccurate details of witch trials. They also acted as instruction manuals, and in fact, details from this pamphlet, which is apprehended, tried and executed, are quoted in a legal manual, A Guide to Grand Jurymen by Richard Bernard, which was published in 1627. I've wanted to tell this story of Mother and Mary Sutton for over a decade now. I've spent hours researching their story and the history of witchcraft. One of my main motivations but also dilemmas for telling this story is that the pamphlet we have as our main evidence is riddled with bias and inaccuracies. So how can I tell their story in a more honest and accurate way if I don't have the full facts? And I never will have the full facts, not unless we invent a time machine. So I've had to walk a tightrope in this episode. I want to tell you the essence of the story that is mapped out in that pamphlet, but I also want to look at that story through the lens of the 21st century and some of the scant archive information that we have that isn't from the pamphlet, but speaks to the characters within it, also sheds light on the pamphlet's shortcomings. And it also poses many, many questions. All I can hope is that I have done Mary and her mother justice in attempting to correct the often misreported aspects of their story. I want to bring context and texture to their lives rather than the more simplistic or sensational reporting that their story often receives. So in this episode, I'll tell you the story that is outlined in that pamphlet, but I'll also interrogate what the story means. And we'll start by considering those animal deaths, which the pamphlet and this episode opened with. The animal deaths. The pamphlet, which is apprehended as source material for this tale, tells us that over a 2-year period, John Inga suffered a loss of £200 in livestock, which I believe is near to £51,000 today. The loss of animals is described in gruesome detail in the pamphlet: horses strangling themselves and kicking each other to death, pigs stampeding into the mill pond, and cattle and oxen struck down with a mysterious sickness. Though it is worth bearing in mind that herds of swine leaping to their death is a well-known biblical story. Jesus was said to send the demons tormenting a human into a herd of pigs, sending them into a frenzy and to their deaths over a cliff. So for Christians at the time, there was a connection between this type of animal behaviour and the idea of demons and the devil. And as we saw in the last episodes of the podcast, in the popular imagination of the 17th century, the devil lurked and witches could be found in every village or town, it seemed. Today, we might consider fatal animal diseases like rabies or BSE, mad cow disease, which can make animals behave in bizarre and violent ways. Poison can also affect domestic animals so that they can hurt themselves and others. But I found no explanation for what caused all of the horses in Inga's stable to be strangled and cut so badly. Sadly, the mutilation of horses by sick individuals is still a problem today that horse owners face. So I do wonder if someone in Milton Ernest actually attacked and killed Inga's horses, but it was unlikely that this attacker was an old woman nor the mother of young children, who of course got the blame. A naughty boy. Cornelius Harbord, Master Inga's ancient retainer or servant, was walking through the mill yard one afternoon towards the mill pond. It was a bright day, and his eyes, not as good as they used to be, spied out a lad idling by the pond. A young lad who should be out working, or if it was one of his master's boys, then he should be indoors learning. Either way, Cornelius would set them right. Harbord picked up his pace. It was one of the young Inga boys. He had a pretty bird's egg to show him before he shooed him back indoors. But as he got closer, his heart sunk, and he put all thoughts of the pretty bird's egg to the back of his mind. The boy idling by the mill pond was that filthy Mary Sutton's bastard boy, Henry. And he wasn't just idling, he was throwing stones and muck into that pond.
Filthy boy. Just like his mother.
Harbord muttered.
Oi, you! Henry Sutton!
He called when he was near. Startled, the boy looked up. He had the same sly green eyes as his mother and grandmother. Cat's eyes they were. Cornelius shuddered and grabbed the boy by the arm.
Ow!
What are you doing, lad?
Skimming pebbles.
No, you're not. You're throwing muck and filth and rocks into my master's mill pond, you little toad. Come here. You come from filth. You play with filth. You are nothing but filth. I've warned you about this so many times I've lost count. I shall box your ears this time and see that it gets the message into your head. Though I doubt it, because your head is as thick as butter, boy.
Harbord leaves a tearful Henry to trudge home. Henry's hands cover his stinging ears. On reaching the small cottage that he, his mother and grandmother call home, next to the piggery, Henry sobs. Inside, he finds his mother and grandmother working on some pottage for his tea. Mary, seeing her boy in tears, rushes to him. "What is the matter, Henry? Are you hurt?" The boy nods his head, and his tale of woe spills out to his mother and grandmother, who listen intently. Mother Sutton, the grandmother, speaks next. "We've told you not to play by that mill pond, Henry. It's best avoided. Old Harbord, he's best avoided. He's a bad man." Mary shoots her mother a sharp look and cuddles her boy closer. But that Cornelius Harbord, he should not have punished Henry so, nor said what he did. He is too free with his fists, is that man. He's a beast. We'll show him what it's like to be beaten for no good reason at all. "No, you won't, Mary Sutton. You'll hold your temper for now and simmer down." Mother Sutton turns to the boy. "It's not fair that he boxed your ears for just skimming stones, which those Inga boys do every day. But you're best to avoid that old turnip and the mill pond for now, Henry. You understand?" The boy nods. "Good. Go fetch your granna knitting, will you?" Off Henry scurries, but he listens the whole time to the talk between his mother and grandmother. Harbord can't keep doing this. If father was well, but he's not, is he, Mary? Your father is not well. And we will not be rash in how we act now, will we? You expect me to sit here and hold my tongue and temper while that beast rules the roost around here? Like he's the master, says where my son can go and can't go? It is one thing for him to treat me like that, but I will not let him rule over my boy. I want vengeance, Ma. I want him to pay. This has gone too far now. Too far. Simmer down, Mary. You are always too hot with your temper, with your feelings, with everything. It's what gets you into trouble. If you want to bring down Cornelius Harbord to his rightful size, you'll wait, my girl. Yes, he's a villain and a brute. He's also a liar and a coward. And we will bring him down. You must wait, though, until his temper cools and your temper cools and his memory does too. It will be all the sweeter for waiting, dear. I promise. Henry returned with the knitting, his eyes wide with the wisdom of his grandmother and his heart full of devotion for his mother, who so desperately wanted to seek revenge on his behalf. What the revenge would be, he tried to guess, imagining Harbord in the stocks with rotting vegetables being pelted at him, and that put a smile on young Henry's face. Now, the pamphlet says that Mary's son is called Henry, and that she has 2 other children, all born illegitimately. Now, this would have been a huge scandal at the time, for practical reasons and moral. From a practical point of view, the problem a village or parish had with an illegitimate child was who would support that child financially and morally. Children were supposed to be supported by their fathers. It was written into recent law that a parish must provide for those who were in need and did not have fathers to support them. Unmarried women who became pregnant were encouraged, coerced, and then humiliated into naming the father of their children. If a woman was particularly stubborn in not declaring who her child's father was, she could be hauled up in front of the whole parish at church on a Sunday and denounced until she confessed to who the father was. In some cases, women were stripped in front of the congregation as a form of humiliation until they told who the father was. The records show that Mary in fact had 2 illegitimate children, a boy called George, born in 1596, and a daughter called Margaret, born in 1604. George has no father recorded on his baptism record, but next to Margaret's name are the words, "Reputed father Richard Page." There is no mention of a 3rd child in the records, nor a record of a Henry Sutton that matches the times and places where he's likely to have lived. So we will never know for sure if Henry was just a name invented by the pamphlet's author, or he was an actual 3rd child of Mary's. Similarly, it is hard to know who Margaret's father really was, as there are a couple of pages noted in the records for Milton Ernest, but neither is a Richard. So it's likely impossible that we'll ever track down who exactly this Richard Page was. As an aside, my visit to the Bedfordshire archives showed that in 1584 and 89, 2 boys were baptised at Milton Ernest as filius populi, which meant they were the children of the parish, having no father to support them. But in Mary's case, her children were not described as children of the parish, even George, who has no reputed father. Later we'll consider who might have been supporting Mary. But for now, back to the pamphlet. So much of this pamphlet is slightly wrong or only provides partial information, we can only guess at the truth. There could have been a 3rd child called Henry, who was just missed off from the records. That happens a lot. Or George could be our boy, and they're just calling him Henry. We'll consider this later, but for now I'll keep calling him Henry, as he's called in the pamphlet. We have no age for Henry, other than him being a young boy, so I guess for the time that would make him under the age of 12, possibly, when he had his ears boxed. If Henry is George, that would make him between the ages of 7 and 15, whilst the action recounted in the pamphlet likely takes place. And Mary's daughter Margaret would have been between the ages of a few months old and 7. A jolly jape to Bedford. The next incident that the pamphlet describes is an odd and strangely humorous one. It refers to it as a tragic comedy, and reminds me of the mechanicals in Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream. It's the kind of nonsense they'd get up to. Our ancient servant Harbird is in the thick of the action again. It's the afternoon, possibly late summer or early autumn, when the days are still long. After a trip to market to sell Master Inger's grain, Harbird is at a Bedford inn. Possibly the Rose, a pub which still exists some 400 odd years later. And he's regaling a story to a group of his friends and acquaintances. Events that only just occurred that very morning on his way to market with a couple of Inger's younger servants.
It was not natural, I'm telling you. Richard, one of the lads, he spotted it first. He's a soft lad, but observant, and he speaks up. Look at that black sow. She's been trotting behind our cart since home. Over a mile, you reckon? What a strange sight. I've known a strange hound follow a cart or a rider, but never a pig. Look at her go. Her little legs trotting. My other companion, Matty, a mere boy, laughing heartily at the pig. I pulled up a cart to have a look, though I reckoned the soft lad was mistaken. She was a strange and unique-looking sow, black from trotter to curly tail, with a thick brush of bristles along her back. I did not like the look upon her, for her eyes were beady and unusually bright. I told Richard to stop being daft and started the cart again, but after another half-mile, I saw the same sow was trotting alongside us now, not even trailing behind. How could she keep up such a pace? It was beyond me. It wasn't natural at all. I whipped those horses to go faster, and after a short while it seemed either the sow had lost interest or could not keep up. Now I'm sure you've all heard what occurred when Master Inger's swine last year, the frenzy they were found in. dashing their brains out, and those that remained ran into the pond and drowned it themselves. Well, since then I have not liked any of the swine in our town, nor the women that keep them. They're kept by two of the filthiest, detestable women you could ever meet. The older is even more ancient than I am, and she does not bear her age like I do. She is decrepit and miserable. Her daughter is lewd and loose, and with 3 bastard children. They should not be left to tend our town swine. But of course, no one listens to old Cornelius. I tell you this, so you know why I am so suspicious of these creatures and their keepers. After a while, with no sign of the sow, I slowed the horses, and we trotted along for another half-mile, until we reached that dark bend in the road, just north of Bedford town. As we turned that bend, ahead of us, there on the straight road, was the black sow. I swear it was the same one as from before, black from trotter to curly tail and bush of bristles along her back. Young Richard said she must know a shortcut, and laughed. But I was apprehensive. I do not feel ashamed to admit that I approached the black sow with some trepidation, taking it slow and steady-like. It was, I have no doubt, the same sow that we had left but a mile back. She was stock still in the road, her head up, not snuffling in the ground. She seemed to sniff the air. Then swiftly she began to spin on the spot, turning like a windmill sail, around and around and around. It makes you dizzy just to see it. And we all thought of those frenzied pigs on Master Inga's farm. The creature began to let out the most hideous, squealing sound. And it spooked the horses, what with the spinning and the screeching. The horses reared and bolted in different directions, and it's a miracle that they did not take Richard and me with them. A miracle. They ran, and the axle came away from the cart. The terrified horses dragged behind them the broken cart, tipping a bag of grain over the side as they capered about the high road. I was left standing next to the wheels and the axle tree of the cart, whilst Richard and Matty chased after their errant horses. A right sorry mess we were in. Meanwhile, the pig had disappeared. There was no sign of her, nor her trotters, nor curly tail, nor the brush of bristles along her back. She had vanished. Eventually the horses trotted back to us, looking sheepish, and we were able with some effort to put the cart back together and collect our fallen goods. Yet, as we approached Bedford, the same sow, black from trotter to twisty tail, with a brush of bristles along her back, appeared a little way beyond us and off to the side, just snuffling along the road, as if nothing had happened. Then as the town appeared, she was gone. So, we made it to the market in time to sell our grain, but only just. My nerves have been a jungle ever since, I'm not ashamed to say. For I do not believe that sow was any natural animal. I do not. They say that witches can send animal familiars to do their bidding, or even shift into the shape of an animal to cause mischief and mayhem. And those swine keepers, Mary and Mother Sutton, are as witch-like as any.
The story brought much amazement to those who heard it, and brought Harbord plenty of drinks, as he told it numerous times. Those observing noticed that his hands shook as he supped, and his brow was prickled with sweat. Some wondered if he was not in a fever and had imagined the whole thing. Harbord intended to catch up with his companions on the way home, so he hired a horse from the inn stables and rode faster and more unsteadily than he would normally, not least because of the drink in him, but also because he was also afraid to see the black sow once more. Less than a mile out of Milton Ernest, Cornelius Harbord caught up with the cart and Matty and Richard, who was singing a jaunty tune they'd picked up that afternoon in Bedford.
Hello! Hello!
Harbord called as he approached. The lads turned in greeting to Harbord, who smiled, hoping for a merry end to his unusual day, until Matty piped up as he approached.
Look, Cornelius, that sow's returned. She's trotted all the way home with us.
And there she was, a little ahead of the cart, dark from her trotters to her twisty tail, with a brush of bristles along her back. The pig stood firm in the road, and Harbord felt his heart quicken with a jolt. The cart horses too seemed to notice the sow again, as if for the first time, and they bolted, this time taking all but the wheels of the cart with them. The horses ran home to Inga's mill, where the villagers witnessed them drag the wheelless cart through the streets and into Inga's yard, where Master Inga was shocked to see his horses return with cart, but no wheels and no men. Eventually, Cornelius's workmates arrived, carrying the cartwheels which had been left in the road when the horses bolted. Harbord had sent the lads ahead of him, whilst he stalked that sow to find out where she would go next. Keeping his distance, he watched the pig, the very one that was black from her trotters to her twisty tail, with a brush of bristles along her back. She approached the cottage of Mother and Mary Sutton, and she went within it. He rushed to his master, and he spilled out the whole sorry tale, from leaving home to following the black sow to the dwelling of the village pig keepers, Mother and Mary Sutton. Inga was not impressed. He was not impressed with this tall tale, and he told the men that they were drunk. They were to sort out this mess and get some rest. But that is not the end of our story with Master Inga's ancient servant, Cornelius Harbord. A mysterious illness. This next incident can be tied to a time of year, though not which year it took place. We know that ploughing had only just begun, so I'm imagining that this took place a day or so after Plough Monday. Plough Monday. Plough Monday is the first Monday in January after Epiphany or Twelfth Night. Across much of Britain, it was celebrated as a last hurrah before the difficult work of ploughing began. Ploughs would be decorated and paraded about villages and towns, with the plough lads and men often dressed up in fancy costume. In fact, in some parts, a plough bessie or plough witch would accompany the parade, which was a ploughman or lad dressed up as an old woman. The plough would be blessed at the church, and villagers would be encouraged to give gifts to the plough team. The whole community relied on the crops being a success, and ploughing was a very important step in that endeavour. Bedfordshire was definitely a place where Plough Monday was observed. I like to imagine that Harbord, as the oldest ploughman, was dressed as the plough witch that year. Did he mimic Mother Sutton? Or was he far too superstitious to do something as silly as that? What we do know is that within days of Plough Monday, Harbord was in the fields with the plough team, gossiping about Mother and Mary Sutton again. He really had a bee in his bonnet about them. He was regaling his workmates with tales of the women's terrible and terrifying deeds. I'm sure that the animal mutilations and illnesses cropped up, and the summer trip to Bedford and the broken cart. The pamphlet does not tell us exactly what the other horrendous acts were, but I think we can infer that this ancient servant, who I'm calling Cornelius Harbord, had some kind of beef with the women. It strikes me as something deeply personal, and with the story I'm about to tell you next, I think you'll see why I think this. Some of the plough lads listen to Harbord's gossip and accusations levelled at the Suttons in interest, whilst others just shake their heads at Harbord's continual chatter about these two local women. Little boys run back and forth, scaring away the crows as the plough makes its steady progress. Then, so suddenly that many of the troop don't understand what has happened at first, Cornelius Harbord falls and hits the ground with a thud. The nearest lad next to Harbord shrieks, "He's hit! He's hit!" The boy points to a wooden bat lying on the cold earth next to Harbord. The The boy explains that as Harbird chattered about the Suttons, the bat rose up from nowhere to strike Harbird in the chest. On receiving the blow, Harbird fell to the ground like a stone. Another man nearby agrees that this is what he saw too. The bat rose up as if by itself, from nowhere, to strike Cornelius down. At first, they think he is dead. But the old servant is breathing, though only faintly. His body is described as stiff and unmovable, like the trunk of a tree. He is rushed on a makeshift stretcher to the home of Master Inga, who takes in this oldest and most trusted servant. Harbird is alive, but only just. He cannot move, and he cannot speak. He appears to be dead, but also alive. The pamphlet says that his loved ones and friends were so afeared for his strange state that they believed it would be better for him to die. To our contemporary understanding, it sounds like Cornelius had a stroke, especially with what we learn happens to him next. From Plough Monday until Shrove Tuesday, probably about 6 weeks, Cornelius remains in a state of paralysis and inability to speak. Gradually, though, some movement returned, as did some ability to communicate. Then, one February night, the household were alerted to Cornelius's groans and cries. Master Inga came running and found Harbird in a state of fear and panic, trembling, clutching at his bedclothes. Though it was hard for Cornelius to speak, he managed to communicate the following. The moon being bright, he could not sleep, and he lay awake watching the gauzy clouds scud across the sky through his bedroom window. Then the window went black, as if filled with smoke, which slunk into his room and then formed the shape of Mary Sutton. He knew it was her, for she wore the same clothes and had the same features. She sat at the end of his bed with her knitting, working away, those needles clicking. As she knitted, she stared at him in silence. Eventually, Mary moved closer to him. She smoothed out the blankets to his side, perching there. Her eyes glinted in the moonlight, and then she spoke. "I can ease what ails you, Cornelius Harbird. You will be restored, whole again, in body and in mind. All you must do is lay with me tonight, here, now, and you will be well again." Harbird was able to resist Mary's advances, though. It is unclear how he did this, other than through his sheer willpower, as he still could not move or speak easily. Thwarted and rejected, Mary Sutton exited from the room through the window just as she had appeared, taking her knitting with her. Once she was gone, Harbird groaned and yelled to get attention. He insisted that Mary Sutton and her mother were the cause of his illness, and only Mary could remove it from him. Others in attendance persuaded Master Inga that this was true. If indeed Mary Sutton had caused the illness, only she can take away the affliction. There is a simple test that can be performed to prove this, someone in the bedchamber said. Bring the woman to Harbird's bedside. Take a drop of blood from her, and in Harbird's sight, if he rallies, she is the cause of his sickness. It seems Master Inga is still unsure of this witchcraft angle. The pamphlet says that he suspected that this was just a fever or the idleness of Harbird's brain that conjured up the story about Mary Sutton. But he does agree to fetch Mary, not least to find out if she had broken into his house that night. Mary is summoned. It's the next morning and Master Inga is out looking for Mary Sutton. He tramps over damp field and ditch and eventually he finds her in a muddy field, tending the hogs as she should be.
Ah, Mary Sutton, I have been looking for you.
Inga jumps down from his horse. Mary looks over and with a shrug she says, "Well, you've found me, sir."
I see you are busy working. keen to work, are you not? Night and day.
Inga takes a step towards Mary. If you say so. I am doing my job, tending the pigs, no more, no less. Mary kicks at some dirt and pats the back of a passing sow.
You are too modest. Were you not abroad last night, visiting my house, knitting and keeping my servants awake?
I have no idea what you're talking about. I may have been knitting last night, but I was at home with my mother and children. I have not set foot in your home for some weeks now. Not since your wife kindly gave me some clothes for Henry.
I have it on good authority that you were at my house last night.
Well, I was not.
Well, maybe we can settle this matter. If you come with me now to my home and face my servant, who says he saw you there.
And which servant is that then?
Cornelius Harbord.
Mary threw her arms in the air and turned squarely to face Master Inga and his men. I will not enter the same room as that brute. I will not be going with you today, sir, and you cannot compel me.
I can, and I will.
You have no constable, no magistrate. I refuse to go with you.
If you will not come peaceably, then I will force you to obey.
Inga's temper snaps, and his dislike for Mary Sutton blooms like hot blood flowing in the face of her defiance.
Men, seize her!
And by force, his men strap Mary to the back of his horse against her will. The pamphlet says it takes many attempts to bind her and secure her onto the horse because she struggles and fights so fiercely. Mary's defiance. Now, a quick word on Mary's defiance. Throughout the pamphlet, she is portrayed as a woman who stands up to authority, who defies her betters, who fights, speaks out, and is almost nonchalant in the face of brutality. To our modern sensibilities, this makes her a hero, a woman who fought back, who would not accept the persecution, misogyny, and violence of her time. But we have to understand why portraying Mary and others accused of witchcraft in this light was part of the propaganda of the time. In the 17th century, an innocent woman accused of witchcraft was expected to protest her innocence, but be modest, demure, and God-fearing in how she did this. Even when witchcraft was not involved, if a local gentleman asked any woman to accompany him to his home on a matter of law, she was supposed to oblige. And not just oblige, but be polite, modest, and moral in her behaviour. To paint Mary as defiant and rude from the very start was a signal to the readers that she was uncouth, unruly, ill-disciplined, rude, ungrateful, and disruptive. Not the kind of woman that you would want living in your village. She was a troublemaker through and through. An equivalent today might be, let's say, a police officer, and let's make her a police woman, asks a white working class woman to help them with their inquiries. An innocent person with nothing to hide might be expected to simply say, okay. But if she swears at, punches and abuses the police officer in a situation like that, that would probably be seen as not just over the top and bad manners, but also unlawful. And that's important to consider. There were laws of the land in the 17th century, and Mary was right that if she was to be accused of a crime, then a constable, magistrate or vicar should be present. But Inga was a gentleman. He was Mary's landlord, employer and arbiter of local petty law on his land. And in this case, he's not accusing her of a crime. He just wants to talk to her and Harbord to get to the bottom of whether she was in his house that night. Just about everyone reading this pamphlet in 1613 would have thought that Mary's response was utterly unreasonable and signalled her guilt, or at least that she was trying to hide something. So it was in the pamphleteer's interest to paint her as troublesome and disruptive. Only the devil could make a woman so awful. However, there is a clue in the historical archives that suggests that Mary was a woman who was defiant in the face of authority. As I mentioned earlier, unmarried women were put under extreme pressure to name, the fathers of their illegitimate children, being publicly humiliated into providing a name when they refused. We know that Mary Sutton refused to give up the name of the father of her first child, George, and likely didn't give an answer for the name of her daughter's father either. Now, there are some very sad reasons why Mary may have held out on providing a name. For example, if she had been raped or was afraid to disclose the name of her attacker, maybe he was a powerful man or even a relative. In that circumstance, it would make sense for a woman to remain silent. She also may not have known who the father was if she had had sex with more than one man, which at the time would have singled her out as being extremely problematic as well. Of course, she may have defied the church and the whole village in refusing to give up the name of the fathers of her children because she just didn't want to. Maybe it was a romance that had gone wrong. Maybe she was just stubborn. Either way, she withstood considerable pressure and withheld staunchly, keeping her secrets, whether for tragic reasons or not. She must have had quite the will of steel, and possibly a sympathetic vicar. Hold that thought about the vicar. The sick room. Mary is shoved into the stuffy and stinking sick room of Cornelius Harbord. I wonder how he reacted to seeing the battered and beaten Mary dragged there in front of him. I can imagine that he was delighted. Just as Master Inga had been instructed, he cuts Mary, drawing blood in front of his ailing and ancient servant, and the pamphlet tells us that once the drops of blood were spilled, Harbord rallied. He moved more freely. He speaks more clearly. I imagine him rising from his bed into a seated position, pointing at Mary triumphant. He is vindicated. He said that she had bewitched him, and here she is, injured, sacrificing her blood to undo the terrible crime that she has committed. Does he shout, try to rise out of the bed? Inga is keen to get Mary out of the room. I suspect he did not expect this experiment to work. The pamphlet often says that he's a man resistant to the ideas of witchcraft, a rational man. This turn of events must have surprised him. But in the commotion of Harbord's recovery, Mary has a chance to step nearer to the old man, and it is said that she reaches out her hand. I imagine it's slim, rough-skinned from the years of work. She points and then gently touches Harbord's neck. And in doing so, he falls back in a swoon and is taken ill once more. This time, his symptoms graver than before. Yet Mary is allowed to leave, and home she goes. To our modern understanding, it sounds like the ancient servant Cornelius Harbord has had another stroke, possibly brought on by the overexertion and excitement of seeing Mary Sutton at his bedside being bled for him. It's clear that Harbord and possibly others see this setback in his health as direct proof of Mary's guilt. She touched him, and he was paralysed once more. Possibly his reaction was psychosomatic, but such things were not understood back then. Yet Inga lets Mary go. And we know that more time passes after this. Enough time passes, the pamphlet says, to allow the story of Mary Sutton inflicting a terrible illness on Cornelius Harbord, not just once but twice, to spread across the whole county. And not only the story of Mary's evil deeds, but that of her mother's as well. Sadly, we never learn from the pamphlet what the majority of Mother Sutton's crimes are. But we do learn about one of them. Sticks and stones. Mother Sutton hurries out from the mill, her head down. It's bad enough that she must tend the pigs of that old brute Harbord, but she must also use his master's mill to grind her grain. Master Inga had always been a kind gentleman to her family, but not since the day he came for Mary. No mother should have to tend a daughter beaten and bruised so, abused by the very man who had once given her a nice piece of cheese for knitting his infant boy a cap and booties, and by the man they owe their living to. Her grip stiffens on the sack of flour she carries, her jaws set hard as she grinds her teeth without realising. And then she hears it behind her. A thud. A stone landing on the ground at her heels. She must hurry. She daren't look back, but more stones come, hurled by more than one hand. One hits her square on the back of her head, and she staggers forward, crying out, although she had meant to stay silent.
Witch!
Witch! Witch!
Witch!
Witch!
Witch!
The children chant at her as she picks herself up, hugging her bag of flour close to her chest as if it can calm her racing heart. A farmhand watches on in silence, leaning on his broom, his face blank, his eyebrows in a frown. He looks behind her as the boys continue, now screaming,
Witch! 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 Witch!
in their high, fine voices, the sons of gentlemen, the son of Master Inga among them, shouting the loudest, hurling the sharpest stones. Another hits her upper arm and her lower back. She staggers on in silence. Until splattered with mud, she turns to face her attackers. Only Inga's 7-year-old son is visible, standing like a little squire, hands on his hips, a smirk on his freckled face, white lace fluttering at his neck in the breeze.
Witch!
He spits at the old lady. You should be careful, Master Inga. That is not a word to use lightly to anyone, including me. Insolently and slyly he grins and spits once more that one word.
Witch!
You will regret this, little boy. You will regret this. And Mother Sutton turns and trudges home with such a raging agony of fear and hate in her belly that she thinks she will vomit. 7 days later, 5 days after falling ill, Inga's boy, the one who threw the stones and screamed the word witch, is dead. The boy's father, John Inga, is heartbroken at the loss of his beloved child, but he still does not act. He still holds back on accusing the Suttons of witchcraft. That is until a visitor arrives at his door. The visitor to Master Inga is an old friend from the north. He finds Inga in, and I quote, a sea of woes, grief-stricken. And as old friends do, they stay up all night. Inga unburdens himself of his misery. He laments the vast fortune that he has lost through the violent deaths and sicknesses of his livestock, his gravely ill servant, and finally he confesses his greatest grief of all, the loss of his son. The northern friend, and let's call him James, asks John Inga if he has any suspicion as to how he has befallen such a litany of misfortune. Surely there's a cause for this. Someone must have caused it. And I think we can understand the predicament those two old friends find themselves in. One has had a terrible time over the past few years and suffered greatly in ways that have been completely out of his control. It must be both terrifying and perplexing for him. Inga lives in a time that does not understand medicine and disease, that has a very rigid way of interpreting the world through religion and simple observation. Even today, when we're faced with misfortune, many of us will ask, why? What have I done to deserve this? Or have others caused this? Sometimes it's easier to blame someone else rather than, say, blaming ourselves, especially when there is no one to blame. And I'll tell you something now that the pamphlet doesn't tell us, but the historical records do. John Inga did lose a son tragically young, but not just one son. He lost 2 of his sons within a matter of weeks of each other. On the 2nd of April 1605, on the very day his son Thomas was baptised, he was also buried. It could have been the case that the boy was stillborn, or that being gravely ill after birth, he was hurriedly baptised on the day that he then died and was buried. Just 5 weeks later, John Inger's son Edward was also buried in All Saints Church, Milton Ernest. We don't have an age for him, which likely means he was born before the Ingers arrived in Milton Ernest. Our first record of them in the village is around 1600, so Edward could conceivably be 7 years old, like the pamphlet says. We believe that Inger had an older child born in Wootton in 1591, also named John, who would have been 14 at the time of his younger brother's death. To lose 2 children within a matter of a month would hit any parent hard, even at a time where child mortality was high. It seems Inger's friend from the north, and this could mean the north of England or possibly Scotland, seems to have had a firm idea of what could have caused such a catalogue of calamities to befall his friend. I imagine them sitting there into the small hours in front of a dying fire, Inger having poured his heart out to his old confidant. We know what the northerner's advice was, because the pamphlet tells us. The northern gent, who I've called James, gives John this piece of advice. Look, John, I know you've tried to resist this idea, but honestly, I think it's the only explanation for what has befallen you. It has to be those women. Your servant accused. It has to be. I've seen it up north many times. These women, they seem harmless enough, poor and helpless even. But mark my words, John, they are not innocent. And you tell me their daughter is lewd and wanton as bastard children? They do not sound like honest women. But I am not saying you simply accuse them. There are tests, you know, trials that you could use to determine whether these women are witches or not. It's only after they pass these tests that you'll know for sure. I have seen them used many times. The tests will show you an innocent woman just as they will show you a guilty one, and I have seen both outcomes. And these tests, they come from the highest authority of the land. The king himself has set them down in his book, Demonology. He recommends these tests be used. There are 3 stages. First, you take the woman, and either mother or daughter will do. You don't need to test both. For sure, if one is guilty, they both are. Now, before I continue with James's advice, bear in mind that all that he recommends is actually done to Mary Sutton the very next day. For Inger is so impressed by his friend's advice, he enacts it by the letter. Though the pamphlet says Mary is not a willing participant, Inger sets out to arrest Mary Sutton, but his men are so terrified to approach her. They claim that she has bewitched them, and they cannot move. It is left for Inger himself to grab Mary. Remember, she is probably in her early 30s when this happens, and she resists. So Inger beats her with a cudgel or a club until she is, and I quote, scarce able to stir. It is in this brutalised state that the following is done to Mary Sutton. You take the woman to where you dam the river for your mill. Make sure to close the dam so the water is high. You'll need some good strong men with you. If possible, a magistrate and a vicar, an official you can summon. You'll also need some trusted women of the village as well. Now, once you've got her to the mill dam, you must strip her to a smock. Then tie a long rope around her waist. Both ends of the rope must be long enough so that they can reach either side of the water. You must have men on each bank, holding that rope, and the woman in the middle of the water. At first the men must keep her afloat, but then the test begins. They must lift the ropes up and down in the water, plunging the ropes deep and bringing them out again. Then let the ropes lie slack and wait. If the woman sinks, she is innocent, and you must grab the ropes and haul her out again of the water before she drowns. But if she floats or swims, then you must move to the second stage of the test. This is where you need the women folk, for they will search the woman, including her secret parts, for astonishing marks. They should look for anything that a servant of the devil or the devil himself could use to suck on. If such a mark is found, then the final test must be performed. It is as the first test, in the water, but this time the woman must be bound, a left thumb to a right big toe, a left big toe to a right thumb, and contorted so, she must be thrown into the water again as before, attached to ropes, with men on either bank. If she sinks, she is innocent, but if she floats, you know you have a witch, without a shadow of a doubt. I can't imagine what must have gone through Mary Sutton's mind as her bruised and battered body was further brutalised in a river like this. The terror of the freezing water, the villagers, her neighbours, watching on or even assisting. The pamphlet claims that not only did Mary's beaten body float, but it defied all attempts by the men holding the ropes to sink her, and that she spun around and around in the water, creating a whirlpool. I wonder if some of the men were desperately trying to make Mary sink because they did not want to see a woman of their village be found to be and executed as a witch. Or maybe others conspired to keep her afloat. It's hard to tell. The pamphlet also claims that when Mary was pulled from the water for the final time, she stood there boldly, defiantly, and asked Inga if he meant to do her any more harm. Almost as if she was asking him, "Is that all you've got?" I see her in my mind's eye, dripping in a cold March morning, staring down her abuser and her neighbours. Inga accuses her of witchcraft, of causing his servant to be ill in bed. Maybe now Inga screams at Mary that she killed his boys, his youngest sons. Yet she denies it. She is staunch in her innocence, shivering, dripping with water, battered, bruised, but defiant. There is an image of this scene, of Mary being ducked in the water. In fact, if you search witch trials of the 17th century online, this image will undoubtedly appear. It's used to illustrate so many blogs and articles about the witch trials, but it isn't always attributed to its source. It's the illustration on the front cover of our pamphlet, which is Apprehended, Tried and Executed, and it depicts Mary Sutton's ducking. In fact, it illustrates the whole story of the pamphlet. We have a servant ploughing next to what looks like bags of grain. He is the ancient servant, I guess, the one I've called Cornelius Harbird. Then there is the cart with the horses bolting, its wheels becoming undone. In front of the cart we have a big black pig with bristles all down its spine and a curly tail. Then we have 3 gentlemen from their attire standing by the mill pond, whilst 2 men holding a rope stand on either bank of the water. In the middle of the water, in just a smock, is hunched Mary Sutton, pictured with a crooked nose and the rope around her waist, but it's also drawn as if she is being hanged, foreshadowing the last tragic deed of the pamphlet. In the water, in a small boat, floats a vicar, whilst more pigs are seen bobbing in the water, the ones that had drowned themselves. The mill is depicted with a boy sitting on its roof. Is he Inga's lost son or Mary's Henry? You can see the image on the blog at weirdinthewade.blog. But this isn't the end of this unofficial trial. Mary is still insisting that she is innocent, but Inga has another card to play that Mary and her mother are not expecting. There are lawmen present, summoned as Inga's friend advised, who now step forward. One has news. He has spent the morning, whilst Mary has been beaten, transported to the mill and abused in the water, talking with her boy, Henry. The justice or magistrate has been talking with Henry about what his mother and grandmother get up to in the privacy of their home, and in particular, how they both wanted revenge on the servant that I've called Harbird for boxing Henry's ears, and against Inga's boy for abusing Mother Sutton. Now, Henry doesn't just confess that the matriarchs of his family wished ill of Harbard and the little Inga boy, but that he saw them perform magic. Henry claims that his mother and grandmother kept familiars, animals in the forms of moles and cats, and that they communed with two spirits or demons known as Dick and Jude, who could take on the body of these cats or moles in order to go about the village and cause harm. He also confesses that his mother and grandmother would let these creatures suck upon the teats discovered on their bodies. One such teat had been found on his mother's thigh when she was searched. Now, what would make a boy confess such a thing? Pressure and coercion from an authority figure like a magistrate, the 17th century equivalent of a police officer or judge rolled into one, seems very likely. Or maybe there was a grain of truth in the boy's story, as often there are in lies, even ones elicited from us under duress. Maybe his mother and grandmother had wished ill on Inga's badly behaved boy and his vicious old servant. Maybe they thought they could curse them, or somehow turn their fortunes by saying spells or charms or words against their enemies. Maybe these two marginalised women just wished that they could enact revenge. And their son, still a child himself, was telling what he thought was the truth. If a whole village is gripped by a belief in witchcraft, in the power of the devil, which is the cause of misfortune, then maybe Henry Sutton believes in it partly too. Believes in some way that he is culpable because his mum and his granny wanted revenge because of the way he had been treated. To confess would shift any blame away from him. Most likely it is a combination of all of the above. He is a young boy afraid, lightly browbeaten and possibly physically beaten by the magistrate to confess. He knows his mother and grandmother wanted revenge, wished harm or justice against those who harmed them, and also that he wanted to see Harbard punished. On being confronted by her son's evidence, it is said that Mary broke down and confessed her guilt. It is the ultimate bargaining chip, is it not? Here, we have your son and he has confessed. Are you going to call him a liar? Are you going to implicate him in the accusations? Or are you, as a mother, going to deflect as much of the attention and blame away from your child as you can, even if that indicts you? I can almost hear Mary say, "I'll confess if you leave my boy alone." And in saving her son, Mary condemned her mother, who was also rounded up, and both mother and daughter were transferred to Bedford jail. It seems there was a commonly held belief in such cases of witchcraft that both mother and daughter would be culpable, the younger indoctrinated by her mum. There was a trial which lasted no more than a day, and the women were found guilty and executed a day later, Tuesday the 31st of March, 1612, though I have seen the date of the execution also given as 7th of April instead. And so ends the story as outlined in the pamphlet. But what do the records say? One of the reasons I'm drawn to this story is because of what the historical records tell us rather than what the pamphlet does. The records paint a much more complex and confusing timeline for the events when compared with the pamphlet. Let's work backwards. Mary and Mother Sutton are tried and executed in late March 1612, but the records show that Inga's boys die in 1605. What on earth was happening during those 7 years? The pamphlet makes it look like everything happened in a single year. Animals die, the pig and cart incident on the way to market, Harbard's sickness, Inga's boy's death, bish bash bosh. It all builds to a crescendo of calamity befalling Inga's family. But that's not how it happened. And why would Inga wait 7 years to enact revenge on the women he thinks killed his sons? Are there any clues in the timings of the Suttons and the Ingas' arrival in Milton Ernest? We know that Master Inge was living in Wootton prior to Milton Ernest. I've seen wills and legal documents that have John Inge as a gentleman yeoman in Wootton in the late 16th century. His eldest son, another John, is born in 1591 there. The Inges arrive in Milton Ernest, according to the parish records, sometime in the early 1600s, certainly before 1605. So they are newcomers to the village. The Suttons first appear in Milton Ernest records in 1578, when a brother to Mary, John, is born. We have no birth record for Mary, but she appears to be the daughter of a George Sutton, and she has siblings, Winifred, John and Francis. Winifred marries a local man named John Bricklow in 1591. The pamphlet certainly backs up that Mother and Mary Sutton were long-term inhabitants, saying that they have been the village pig keepers for near on 20 years, and that they took on that role after falling on hard times. So when they arrived in the village just over 30 years before the witch trial, they were in different, more elevated circumstances. Around the same time that this Sutton family, Mary's family, arrive in Milton Ernest, so does a new vicar. He is a Cambridge man and was ordained just up the road at Buckden. Milton Ernest is his first and only parish, and his name is Robert Sutton. Could he somehow be related to our Suttons? They arrive within a year of each other to Milton Ernest. And there's another reason that they could be connected. Robert Sutton remains vicar until his death in March 1611. Within a year of his death, Mary and her mother are accused, tried, and executed for witchcraft. And we know that at least one of the malicious acts that they're accused of performing, possibly the most malicious of the acts, the death of Inge's son, actually happened in 1605, when Robert Sutton was still alive and vicar. Was Robert Sutton, the vicar of Milton Ernest, somehow protecting Mary and Mother Sutton? I'm not the only person to think this. The wonderful author and expert on all things witch-related, Willow Winsham, first spotted this link and covered it in her excellent book, England's Witchcraft Trials, a decade ago. When I read the chapter on Mary and Mother Sutton in the book, I was delighted to see that it wasn't just me making that link between the two Sutton families. Robert Sutton. I have found no convincing baptism record for Robert Sutton. He appears in the records when he is ordained, and that's how we know that he went to Cambridge for his education, though some records say he didn't have a degree, whilst others say that he did. We do know a few things about his term as vicar in Milton Ernest. He was an excellent record keeper. His spellings were consistent and correct for the time. Both before and after his term as vicar, the records are far more patchy and sparse. They're often written phonetically with multiple variants for spellings of the same word recorded, but not when Robert Sutton is vicar. Robert Sutton wasn't universally loved in Milton Ernest, though. There are 2 complaints made against him to the bishop. The first is early on in his tenure. He is accused of cutting down ash trees to fix the vicarage roof, rather than using the timber for the community in some way. The second complaint is in the 1580s, and that is that he is fond of visiting the alehouse after hours, and that he is quarrelling with his neighbours. We don't really find out much more than that, and he doesn't seem to have been punished by the vicar for these complaints. By 1597, he is elected as a proctor, which meant he could provide legal representation in the courts for his parishioners. This often covered things like probate disputes around wills. But I wonder if it also held some weight in deciding whether accusations of witchcraft should be pursued. A later report to the bishop notes that Sutton's vicarage is in good order, and that the patrons of the parish are a gentleman named Franklin and a widow, Rolt. Bread is being provided for the poor. It does note that there is no licensed preacher in the parish. My understanding of these licensed preachers was that they were a way to get the government-sanctioned sermons and homilies out to the people. A vicar could be a licensed preacher as well, but a lay person could be a licensed preacher. Training was needed to be a licensed preacher. Under Elizabeth I in King James, these preachers spread the preferred interpretation of the Gospels. By 1605, Milton Ernest has a licensed preacher, John Smith, who goes on to become Robert Sutton's replacement as vicar. We know that Sutton had a large family himself, with 9 children, 6 of whom made it past the age of 14. We also know that when he submitted records for the county of Bedfordshire, not the usual parish records, but ones recording the gentry's records only, he included his own offspring alongside the reports of the local squires and gentlemen. No previous or subsequent vicars did this. He's referred to as Sir Robert Sutton in some records, but in others just plain Robert. Now, I'm not sure if that means he was sometimes presenting himself as a gentleman. So what can we deduce from these facts? Robert Sutton was educated, but maybe not as educated as he made out. Yet he believed he was on the same level as the local gentleman, like John Inge. He was a good administrator, and he took his role of recorder of information for the state and church seriously. The comfort of his family were important to him. Home improvements came first. He wasn't a Puritan, nor had Catholic sympathies from what we can tell, and he possibly liked to drink. He didn't sign up to be a licensed preacher. Maybe he thought it unnecessary, or perhaps he held out so that he could have one assigned to him to assist him in his role. He was arbiter in legal matters and elected by his peers to carry out this role, so he was no pariah or outcast. After a slightly rocky start to his tenure, he seems to have settled into the role and his behaviour is noted as good. But there was clearly a faction or an individual who was prepared to complain about him to the bishop twice whilst he was vicar. Also, during his lifetime, no one in the village was tried or convicted of witchcraft. John Smith, the licensed preacher who took over as vicar at Milton Ernest on Robert's death, appears to have been greatly loved by the town, so much so they put up a plaque for him when he died. Robert didn't get a plaque. But could the Reverend Robert have been protecting Mary and her mother, and if so, why? The obvious conclusion seems to be that they were related, but then again, how could a Cambridge-educated vicar be related to a family who ended up as pig keepers and were then condemned as witches? There are 3 options here. The first is that they weren't related, and it's just a coincidence that they have the same name, that they turned up in Milton Ernest at the same time, and it is all just a coincidence that it's only after Robert's death that Mary and her mother are accused. Or Robert just didn't have any truck with the witch trials, and no matter the name of those accused, he would have resisted any grievances getting out of hand. Or it could be that they weren't closely related, but sharing the same name, maybe the poorer Suttons hoped or believed that they were related. I'm getting Tessa the D'Urberville vibes here. Maybe Robert looked out for them because they could have been distant kin. Or maybe they were related. Cousins perhaps, or maybe Mary's father George was a younger sibling to Robert. Maybe Robert's family weren't that wealthy. The fact he puts himself forward in the records on a level with the gentleman is because he feels he should be, rather than he is their equal. Maybe he had a chip on his shoulder about his humble background. Maybe George was a younger brother, uncle or cousin who had fallen on hard times. We know from the pamphlet that Mother and Mary Sutton hadn't always been pig keepers. This role was given to them by the parish around 1590. The vicar would have been in a position to have some say in doling out such roles. We'll never know for sure what the Suttons' relationships were, but one other question troubled me. If some of the action described in the pamphlet had happened back in 1605, when the Inga's sons die, why suddenly revive it all in 1612, 7 years later? Surely just the death of the vicar, who may have protected Mary and her mother, isn't enough. Why would the pamphlet talk about the deaths as being the last straw for Inga, when there was so much time after them? I may have an answer in the form of 2 other deaths, which took place in the summer of 1611, which could have brought back memories of what happened to John Inga's 2 boys. Milton Ernest had a number of genteel families. The Rolts were one, who had a manor at Milton Ernest. Another family were the Fitzgeoffreys. Records of their baptisms, marriages and deaths appear in the parish and county records. The families were interconnected closely through marriage. On the 22nd of September 1611, 5-year-old Catherine Fitzgeoffrey died, and within a month, on the 16th of October 1611, her 2-year-old brother Christopher also died. 2 siblings dying within a month of one another, just like the Inga boys. Now, you may think surely this happened all the time back then. Well, I went back through the Milton Ernest records at the archives in Bedford and found that siblings dying within a month of each other happened only 3 times from 1580 to 1612 in Milton Ernest. The first time was in 1600, when it was actually 2 of Robert Sutton's children. Yes, the vicar's daughters that died. Priscilla, who was 14, died on the 15th of August, 1600. And then her 8-year-old sister Elizabeth died on the 29th of the same month. Then we have the Inga's boys in April and May 1605. And then the Fitzgeoffreys children in the autumn of 1611. There is no indication of disease sweeping through the whole village at these times. So for all 3 occurrences, whatever killed the children seemed to have been confined to their individual households, and so more likely to have been misunderstood. There are no other patterns like this. To our modern understanding, it sounds like an infectious disease of infants and children. In fact, scarlet fever was fairly new at the time, and so wasn't always recognised in rural England in the 1600s as a transmissible disease. So these could have been seen as sudden and unexplained deaths rather than illness. So I wonder if the death of the Fitzgeoffrey children just brought back Inga's grief and disquiet about the Suttons, as well as the population of Milton Ernest itself recognising a pattern in deaths that they did not understand. So why aren't the deaths of the Fitzgeoffrey's children included in the pamphlet? Well, it seems the story has come from the friend of the Ingas, not someone actually linked to the village. There's no details of the court case. It's as if someone passing through got the information about the ducking and why it happened, but not anything else. The narrative being smushed together over a shorter timeline also makes it more compelling and understandable to readers. Propaganda stories like this aren't about accuracy, they're about impact. And let's say the Inga boys died in 1605, but Harbord only becomes ill in 1611, then it is his accusation which sparks the trial. But for impact in the pamphlet, it makes more sense for it being about the death of Inga's child. Why should facts get in the way of a good and important story the propagandists want to share? There is also one other curious feature of the Milton Ernest records, which means our understanding of what was happening between 1608 and 1610 is obscured, and that's that the parish records for those 3 years were torn out of the records book. Thanks to the county and ecclesiastic records, we do have details of baptisms, marriages and burials for the genteel class at the time, but not the village as a whole. Why would anyone tear out those records, and when was it done? Is it a coincidence, or is it somehow linked to our story? And there's one final strange link between Robert Sutton and Mary and Mother Sutton. If the women were executed on the 31st of March 1612, then it was exactly 1 year to the day since Robert Sutton was buried. If he had been protecting Mother and Mary Sutton from prosecution, it took exactly 12 months for it to all come undone. Conclusion. There is no happy ending to this story, and there are far more questions than answers. But so often I have seen this tale of Mary and Mother Sutton written up almost verbatim from the pamphlet, with no inquiry as to why the pamphlet was written in the first place or what the truth was about these women. And that's why I wanted to put the record as straight as I could. What happened to the women in life was terrible and shocking, but the misinformation about them after their death, which is still reported to this day without challenge, is equally awful. My personal opinion is that the ancient servant, who I called Cornelius Harbird, had some kind of infatuation maybe with Mary, and she'd brushed him off. Maybe he then really did believe that she had bewitched him, or maybe he just wanted to hurt her because of rejection. He seems to lead the accusations. I think Mary and her mother were probably angry at Harbird, angry at the way they were treated, maybe also frustrated and angry at having fallen on hard times. I'd like to think that Mary chose to live her unconventional life, that she did have some agency. She chose not to marry, and many women who did have illegitimate children would marry. It was their only way to gain some semblance of respectability and security. But Mary held out. She also held out on admitting to who the fathers of her children were. These all hint at her having a strong and unconventional streak. But sadly, what we know of the time points to the fact that Mary may not have had that many choices in her life. She may have kept quiet about her children's fathers out of fear or shame. She may have been marked out as different in some way from very, very early on in life. We'll never know. And we know so little about her mother. She is not even given a name in the pamphlet. I have found an Agnes Slusen of Essex who married a George Sutton around the time that she may have got married. But we'll never know if Mother Sutton was an Agnes. We know that she saw one of her daughters marry and one of her daughters not. Why she was singled out as being a witch is unclear from the pamphlet, though they claim that she taught Mary everything she knew. Mother Sutton was treated with both misogyny and ageism in the way that she was ignored by the pamphlet. Of course she was a witch, it almost screams at us. She was old and a pig keeper, the kind of woman kids throw stones at. But I like to think of her as Agnes, and I hope that she was happy at some times in her life. Maybe on the day that she saw her daughter Winifred get married. Maybe she's found satisfaction in tramping about the neighbourhood with the pigs, enjoying the fresh air and the sunshine. We'll also never know if the mother and daughter did think that they could influence the world around them through magic. Many did believe in this at the time, and if they were down on their luck and dealt a harsh hand in life, maybe they did turn to the old spells and charms to try to give themselves some agency. Maybe they did curse the children who threw stones at Mother Sutton. Who could blame them? The Suttons disappear from the records of Milton Ernest, so we do not know what happened to Margaret and George, Mary's children. Little Margaret was only 7 years old when her mother and grandmother are taken from her. And what about Inga? I think he probably did resist the belief in witchcraft, for a while at least. And maybe his local vicar encouraged him to be rational. But once that influence was gone, and another tragic death of children happened in Milton Ernest to one of his friends, it was too much for Inga to stand. He buckled and blamed his hardships on the 2 women he'd previously given charity to, because it was easier than living with the uncertainty and the questions of why he'd been so unlucky, why he'd been singled out. It's such a sad story. But one irony is that the pamphleteers chose to portray Mary Sutton as defiant and strong, someone to be feared, someone who was powerful. She could paralyse those men who were coming to arrest her. She could make people ill, and her and her mother together could kill. Now, they did this to scare people, the pamphleteers. They did this to show their readers how abhorrent these witches were. But in the 21st century, we read it so differently. Their portrayal makes Mary the hero, righteous with her anger, powerful in the face of persecution, a figure to be admired and empathised with, to be honoured and recognised for her and her mother's strength in the face of oppression. No, it's not a happy story, but it is an important one. As I mentioned in the episode about the witches of Bedfordshire, many of the motives and difficult feelings that are bound up in Mother and Mary Sutton's story are still with us today. Whether it's the fear of what we don't understand or can't explain, or the urge to lash out when we're in pain or suffering, there is something universal about this story of loss and blame. There are still people who wield power in a way that harms others and their communities. There are still groups of people who are vilified and used as scapegoats by our modern versions of the pamphleteers, namely the internet and social media. Women still face violence in their homes and neighbourhoods, and poverty is still a problem that we have not solved. You can analyse Mary and Mother Sutton's story from a religious, feminist, social and class perspective. You can find parallels between then and now, but I think I'm also drawn to this story for another reason. I often wonder how Mary and her mother spent their time in prison together, almost certainly in the same cell. When you think about the horror of such a thing, it makes you feel small, as they must have done. Small, yet distilled down to the most concentrated and pure thing in their universe. The prison then was built on the old Bedford Bridge across the River Ouse. It was dark and dank, like something out of a Dark Souls computer game. I think about mother and daughter waiting for their deaths together, and then the story is a simple one, a powerful one, a family drama, a heart-wrenching tragedy caused by all of the societal and religious problems that I mentioned above. But for them, for Mary and her mother, it was something beyond all of that. I doubt they would give a damn about the parallels for us today. Mother and daughter would have been solely focused on themselves. Their last days and hours, it was just about them. It was all about them and their children and grandchildren, their siblings, nephews, nieces, their loved ones and neighbours that they were soon to be taken from. Their memories, their experiences, their lives. That was all that mattered to them. I see Mary and her mother in my mind's eye together, filling that cramped and disgusting prison cell with their righteous anger, but also with the love and the laughter that they felt throughout their lives. They are two ordinary women, but they are also remarkable, extraordinary, and they are very much their own. I wish they could tell their story in their words, but that is impossible. So they stare at us from history, defiant, impossible to define, unique, and utterly precious. Thank you so much for listening to Weird in the Wade. As I've already said, this episode is a really important one for me. I've been researching Mary and Mother Sutton for over a decade. It's a story that fascinates me and that I don't think I'll ever tire of. I hope I have done them justice today. And if your interest is piqued and you'd like to know more about Mother and Mary Sutton, about Milton Ernest, or about the witch trials and witchcraft in general, please check out the show blog, weirdinthewade.blog. I'd also like to say a really special thank you to Owen Staten for voicing the characters of Inga and Cornelius Harbird. Now, I made up the name Cornelius Harbird because the pamphlet just calls him an ancient retainer or servant. And I just cannot thank Owen enough for creating that character for me, for bringing it to life, for breathing something into Cornelius Harbord that even I hadn't quite anticipated. Thank you so much, Owen. And I'd also like to thank Tess for the beautiful Lady Sutton theme that has played throughout this episode. And not only Tess, but also my friend Charlotte Pascoe, who plays oboe on that piece. It was a bit of a 30-year project in the making. Tess, Charlotte and I are old school friends from the mid to late 80s when I lived in Newquay. And we dreamed of having a band one day and creating music. Well, today that has kind of happened. Tess composed the beautiful theme for the Lady Sutton and Charlotte played the oboe. Tess obviously played the piano as well. It is a beautiful piece of music. And if you'd like even more witch-related content and other extra content, then please do check out my Patreon. That's Weird in the Wade at Patreon. There you will find an episode that was released in March where I chatted about all things witches in Bedfordshire and Shropshire with the fantastic folklorist Amy Boucher. She also has a podcast called the Shropshire Witches Podcast, which I cannot recommend enough. But we had a fantastic conversation comparing and contrasting the witch stories and folklore of Bedfordshire and Shropshire. And this month, the Patreon episode will be some live recordings from when I visited Milton Ernest and a deeper dive into some of the aspects of this story. From £3.50 a month, the price of a cup of coffee, you can get extra content and support Weird in the Wade. Please do check it out. And you can support the show in many other ways by sharing it with friends and family, sharing on social media, following us on social media. We're pretty much everywhere. Just search Weird in the Wade. And you can also, where possible, like and review the show. It really helps other people find Weird in the Wade. Thank you so much for listening to Weird in the Wade. Weird in the Wade is researched, written, presented and produced by me, Nat Doig. Theme music is by Tess Savagear. The Lady Sutton theme was written by Tess Savagear and performed by Tess Savagear and Charlotte Pascoe on oboe. And all additional music and sound effects are from Epidemic Sound.